Welcome everybody to our 9th installment of Italo Calvino's If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, translated by one William Weaver. That was a name if I ever heard one. And where we got to this time was the book in a network of lines that intersect. Well, seemingly I feel as though that's what this entire experience has been, although maybe this is about expression, decompression, and then condensation and precipitation, as much as there's a flow of things within the world. There's a flow and a gathering and dispersal of ideas from which we make choices. And we're experiencing those things within a book about these things. It just so happens that the lines themselves seem to intersect with lines that would be about if the book was a single line, in a single line of the book. But after having read our little bit there for this reading, we find ourselves with our main attraction going to Ludmilla's house. Actually, he telephones her and says a bunch of stuff about having a book again, right? And she's like, hey, go over to my house. And so he ends up going over to her house. She's like, I leave my key under the mat. And he goes and walks in there. And we find ourselves all of a sudden at mercy to the wordplay that Italo Calvino has so much fun with in regards to his changing these ideas of perspective, so that if time is this multi-experiential thing, then basically it's sort of like you can transcend your own framework by the matter that you're connected to everything else. And so we're meant to sort of change our perspective here. He says, what are you like, other reader? It is time for this book in the second person to address itself no longer to a general male you, perhaps brother and double of a hypocrite I, but directly to you who appeared already in the second chapter as the third person necessary for the novel to be a novel, for something to happen between that male second person and the female third, for something to take form, develop, or deteriorate according to the phases of human events. It's almost like, it's like the very long way of explaining that we're changing perspectives here, but he does it, I feel like, purposefully in this way so that while you're changing perspectives, I think you're supposed to come to realize that it's the same thing across all those lines. And I think that he describes it in such a manner so that you can see basically that you are connected to each, I guess, logical phrase as to the construction of language and grammar, that you can see the steps you take between basically changing your points of view until it's another person's point of view. But you're realizing that it's sort of the same thing throughout that entire exchange. At least that's kind of what I came to say that there was in terms of some realization as to what I felt like was going on in terms of his very in-depth explanation as to how profound the elementary components of sentence structure were in their basic form, right? And I think, again, that he does that. It's like just sort of connecting that cycle of things like I did at the very beginning in that expression of whatever, so that we can minimize the jumps that occur and we can sort of have a transition that's fluid from point of view to point of view. And then maybe in some way we can see that maybe the details don't really matter. And I think that we're going to be coming up to a point in here where I get to that more clearly, because I think that this is all sort of like something coming to a climax here, but it's like a climax of understanding just the natural course of language, perhaps, and how this story has portrayed perhaps the idea of all books, almost. Just in the way that this reader has been going through these experiences of trying to read something, and we actually almost catch glimpses of there being the author here as well, and just how sort of disconnected something is to where they get their ideas from, to when ideas themselves form. And then perhaps maybe when we're reading all of these different types of stories, it's almost like we're reading the same thing over and over and over. It's just this idea that we're in continual repetition, and it's this continual play of ourselves with this textual sensation that perhaps actually motivates us, and perhaps we would never know if that was the case, if it really was like that, in regards to our understanding of a situation that we're in. Is life more of a feeling, or is it more of an understanding, sort of something that he kind of flip-flops back and forth in his rhetoric and dialogue anyways. So he goes into her house and he basically browses through all of her things, and he comes to these conclusions about her. But I think that we're supposed to understand that maybe all of these things are contained within something else. And it's like maybe how all of us are contained within something else as well. And it's just like, the more that we try to understand this clarity, then maybe it's more of just we're being confronted with those ideas that I've said in a few of my other presentations of work. It's just that the more clarity that we have, the more work that we actually have, and it's the fear of a blank page. It's the fear of maybe that you're not who you want to be. You know, it's the fear that you're blank. And I think that work itself is kind of the ultimate test of us in this world, because we're afraid of work. Maybe not because we're afraid of the pain that maybe work provides, but maybe that work is going to let us down, because all along work was just another story. And maybe that's what this book is about, is this idea that life is just a symposium sort of like this, and everything is sort of just a story. And he converges more into these ideas in here further. I'll get to them in a second. So he goes on to say, I like this part: don't believe that the book is losing sight of you, reader. The you that was shifted to the other reader can, at any sentence, be addressed to you again. You are always a possible you. Who would dare sentence you to the loss of the you? A catastrophe as terrible as the loss of the I. For a second person discourse to become a novel, at least two yous are required, distinct and concomitant, which stand out from the crowd of he's, she's, and they's. And it's like he's just making a story up about it's like sub-level basic functions almost. It's almost like he's taken the idea of what we use as discourse, and you can sort of see right there that it's just one level below the surface. It's, instead of looking at it just at the surface, it's like one level below the surface. And as soon as one thing is taken out of place, all of a sudden everything can be told as a story, even if it's just a story about how language itself is constructed. All it takes is for one thing to be basically that one level below, whatever that one level below is, whatever that represents, the one thing that we've taken out of context or something like that, then it's all of a sudden everything can become a story to an extent. And so life is just that continual perspective of something almost coming out of context. It's like some experience of the timeless experiencing time. And then the moment where we experience timelessness again is given us a surety to make another jump or shift in perspective, or to believe that work is true, so that we actually sort of change our lives or our worlds or change ourselves in some way. And then we experience time again. And then we all of a sudden have some great fear, because maybe timelessness, again, just is, sort of parodied with my whole idea of everything just being work. Like, what do we really have to fear at the end of time but perhaps work? Perhaps that idea that maybe we do have power. And I think that can be scary to a lot of people, because it makes them feel like maybe they could make a mistake. Or maybe they already know that mistakes will be made if they make a move. But they know they have to make a move. And so maybe that's just sort of, what a good story entails in terms of characters and character development and all of these things. So anyways, then this other guy, Inario, comes in, who is like this very interesting character, who our interest here questions, because he actually has this girl Ludmilla as a love interest, and so why is this guy Inario in her life, and blah 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 blah. He's like, I'm just in here looking for books, and he's like, I thought you didn't read because this guy Inario told me he doesn't read or whatever. And then all of a sudden he's like, well, I make sculptures of books, and he's like, they're making a book out of all my See, he just plays off stuff like that, and it's just like a continual cycle of everything, which becomes as monotonous and as droning as basically, anything can become. But he's like, yeah, I make sculptures of books, and they're gonna make a book out of all my book sculptures. And he's like, then I'll make a book out of that, or I'll make a sculpture out of that book of my book sculptures, and like this cycle will just continue, kind of thing. And so anyways, he goes to take one of the books off the shelf, and he's like, no, don't take that one. That's the reason I'm here, to share this new story with her about that guy on the telephone or whatever. And anyways, he's like, he was like, use this one instead. And he's like, I recognize that one. And then we go into another room in her house, and he's like, you are thunderstruck. Reading Marana's letters, you felt you were encountering Ludmilla at every turn, because you can't stop thinking of her. This is how you explained it, a proof of your being in love. Now moving around Ludmilla's house, you come upon traces of Marana, which means that this guy's been there too, this translator, this publisher or whatever. And it's just like this very interesting story of just like her leaving when he was there, and now all of a sudden she has these quotes of like, I don't know, Ludmilla says that whatever he touches, if it isn't false already, becomes false. And it's just, I think it's this idea of what I was just explaining, of creating these genuine stories, or feeling like we're genuine in our lives by any measure or mean. And he goes on to further say, she said that when Marana convinces her that the difference between the true and the false is only a prejudice of ours, she feels the need to see someone who makes books the way a pumpkin vine makes pumpkins. That's how she put it. And so it's like all of a sudden we're like seeing that in the book world, it's just like there's things that are just almost innocent, and she just has felt like this individual obviously is the furthest thing from that innocence of what books represent. And that's where I was sort of saying that fear of just that we have power, because, you know, it's like the old saying of like, can you enjoy your own book? You know what I mean? Can you enjoy your own story? And that's why I just say it's work. But as soon as something becomes work, I think that it involves that whole idea of language grammatisms that he was introducing, where it's like, as soon as you involve the idea of work, it's the idea of texture. And I think that texture gives us a proof that there is something else, and maybe then we actually fear that there is something else rather than fearing ourselves. You know, it's that believing in time again, that we experience. But again, it's kind of like, if this is how the universe operates, there'd be really no way of telling, just by the nature of death, instinctively enough, right? Because you can't live forever to understand if that's what it is or not. And nobody has, and nobody really knows. And so, you know, we must work. Because nobody really knows everything. But even though we don't know everything, maybe we can try to work on our character. Even though we don't have time, maybe we're given some grace. Or at least maybe we could work on giving these things to ourselves. And so then we get into this part where he's talking with Ludmilla, and man, oh man, he just turns this idea of book reading into the idea of love making, and we get a whole explicit scene here. And it's I don't feel like it's anything that I can't necessarily read, but I just felt like it's worth reading, because it was just like, I've never it's just like one of those things where it's like, but see, it's like he's done it innocently or whatever. It's like somehow, if something is innocent, then it's really not what it is. It's like you're just seeing something, almost. It's like you're just recognizing something because you recognize yourself. And I feel like maybe that's, again, another part of that whole idea of everything is being twisted into lies type of thing by this Marana character or whatever, because maybe really recognizing somebody is an innocent thing, and if you actually look at it, if you truly recognize something at that level of sensuality, there's no real way that you can basically touch that thing. And so in that way, it's like there really is no way for there to be any putrefaction of form in terms of something basically being changed. It's almost like at that very moment you catch a glimpse of there being a line. And a simple line itself gives us the image of two things, but it's one thing at that time. And so that whole kind of thing, you can play off of that idea of there being this third person, this three-dimensional reality of everything, and it's all represented within just some image of a line. And I think that there's something very sort of poetic about that. That all of life is just a single sort of line. And maybe it's the most beautiful thing that could ever be. It's incorruptible. And I sort of catch a glimpse of that here, and it's unchanging, kind of thing. But anyways, I'm going to read this, and you can tell me if that's a you sort of envision with this, but maybe it is just poetic like that. Maybe that is the beginning and the end. You know what I mean? It's just that line. But it's the play of all those things that makes us feel like there's two and then there's three, and so on and so forth. But you are in bed together, you two readers, so the moment has come to address you in the second person plural, a very serious operation, because it is tantamount to considering the two of you a single subject. I'm speaking to you two, a fairly unrecognizable tangle under the rumpled sheet. Maybe afterward you will go your separate ways, and the story will again have to shift gears, painfully to alternate between the feminine two and the masculine. But now, since your bodies are trying to find skin to skin the adhesion most generous in sensations, to transmit and receive vibrations and waves, to compenetrate the fullness and the voids, since in mental activity you have also agreed on the maximum agreement, you can be addressed with an articulated speech that includes you both in a sole, two-headed person. First of all, the field of action or of existence must be established for this double entity you form. Where is the reciprocal identification leading? What is the central theme that recurs in your variations and modulations? Attention concentrated on not losing anything of its own potential, on prolonging a state of reactivity, on exploiting the accumulation of the other's desire in order to multiply one's own charge? Or is it the most submissive abandonment, the exploration of the immensity of strokable and reciprocally stroking spaces, the dissolving of one's being in a lake whose surface is infinitely tactile? In both situations, you certainly do not exist except in relation to each other. And that's why he's pointing that to me. It's just like, you're in this experience, you really only come to the place where you only know anything by knowing yourself, and it's almost like everything is stripped from you. For you to even have feelings like this. And that's why I said maybe the most innocent way, you know what I mean, is sort of like maybe the most complicated. And you can always tell when somebody is sort of like skipped steps and cheated, basically. You know. And so it's up to you to, I guess, assess how much you love language, and maybe to say something like you value your capacity to express a dialogue more than any other thing. And as sure enough, it's as much a test of character as anything, because it's also the easiest thing to access. And so the only real person you have to fault if you can't love language and dialogue is yourself. So to continue on, all the void of the mental space invest in itself at the maximum interest or spend itself to the last penny. In short, what you are doing is very beautiful, but grammatically it doesn't change a thing. And I thought that was very kind of like pen strokey moment or whatever, you know what I mean? And very beautiful, but grammatically it doesn't change a thing. It's just like he's just said something, but the way you express it is the same as the way you express anything else. At the moment when you most appear to be united, I have no idea how to say that. A second person plural, you are two twos, more separate and circumscribed than before. And then he's just like, so you know what I mean? It's like this whole idea of like connection and then like disconnection kind of thing. And I went on to write like more of like, we are all composed of eternities, bound and not bound by the moment of truth. What connects all things to be true? This is the process of all things to take shape. The conspiracy is that it makes its own meaning in the end, which lets go of any character. Is my kind of like addition to that. And then he says this too, which I thought was like very interesting. He talks about meanwhile, in the satisfaction you receive from her way of reading you, from the textual quotations of your physical objectivity, you begin to harbor a doubt that she is not reading you single and whole as you are, but using fragments of you detached from the context to construct for herself a ghostly partner known to her alone and the penumbra of her semi-consciousness. And what she is deciphering is this apocryphal visitor, not you. And it's just like, all of a sudden, it's just like by opening up and sort of like sharing and committing to something, it's that you've actually been played, basically, and been made the fool of, you know what I mean? Which is sort of like what I have said at the very beginning, my very first sort of treatise on my reading this book anyways, which is just like committing to anything is always, you know what I mean, going to be advantageous to the thing that you commit to. And it's like, but you know, what kind of character are you? And it's like, do you feel like you're being cheated if all you have are words? But at some point in time, you know what I mean, I feel like I can add on to what he's saying here, and I don't have to necessarily take everything that he's saying to be the final pen stroke. Because, for instance, he goes on to then say, like lovers reading of each other's bodies, of that concentrate of mind and body which lovers used to go to bed together, differs from the reading of written pages, and that is not linear. It starts at any point, skips, repeats itself, goes backward, insists, ramifies in simultaneous and divergent messages, converges again, has moments of irritation, turns the page, finds its place, gets lost. A direction can be recognized in it, a route to an end, since it tends toward a climax, and with this end in view it arranges rhythmic phases, metrical scansions, recurrence of motives. But is the climax really the end, or is the race toward that end opposed by another drive which works in the opposite direction, swimming against the moment's recovering time? If one wanted to depict the whole thing graphically, every episode with its climax would require a three-dimensional model, perhaps four-dimensional, or rather no model. Every experience is unrepeatable. What makes lovemaking and reading resemble each other most is that within both of them, time and space is open, different from measurable time and space. But anyways, maybe I don't really necessarily disagree with him, but I would just, you know, say like the act of writing is just, you know, and perhaps maybe another act of listening to something, and what is reading but listening too, you know what I mean? And maybe we can help build things up by saying like, just, you know what I mean, believe in you, kind of thing. When we don't have to make this whole idea of who's winning or who's losing or who's dominant, who's recessive, or whatever you want to say, you know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, you know what I mean, we can just say like, just believe in the line or whatever, you know what I mean? And then all that does is make you should believe in yourself. Because if at some point in time maybe somebody feels like we've been played the fool because they've just felt like that this has no substantial in anything other than emotion, right? Which is the foundation of what this story is trying to sort of come together about anyways. But do not wax ironic on this prospect of conjugal harmony. Or perhaps Ludmilla has already stopped believing in anguish as a condition of truth. Perhaps someone has demonstrated to her that anguish, too, is a mechanism, that there is nothing more easily falsified than the unconscious. He has just so many of these little philosophies that are just interspersed in, like... the thoughts of the guy, but just like, man, this guy is like the most maniacal type of being to like ever exist, to like think of all this stuff as he's like participating in these actions. But anyways, if that wasn't a network of lines that intersect for you, then that's what we're going to be reading next time. So later.